Hey, it's George, and welcome to the Call to Adventure podcast. We're on a mission to help create happier people and a healthier planet. So let's get after it. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Call to Adventure podcast with me, the founder of Call to Adventure, George Beasley. I'm currently in Sweden and traveling around a little bit, doing the whole van life thing to scout out some new trips for you guys, and it's been awesome. The weather's been great. I've been doing a lot of swimming and hiking and trail running, so yeah, lots of exciting things coming up. So keep an eye out on the site or join the newsletter to see when those new trips are ready. Speaking of trips, we've still got a few spaces left on our guided hiking and wild camping in Snowdonia trip, and there's a few going for the hiking and scrambling trip too. Both explore the lesser trodden parts of the Snowdonia National Park, my local playground, and I absolutely love that place. Hopefully you'll get treated to a beautiful starry night sky too, but it's sure to be a great trip either way. In light of COVID, we're offering you 3 options so you can book in complete confidence. If the trip can't go ahead due to COVID, you can either move to later dates, change to a different trip, or just get a full refund, no questions asked. But now on to today's pod. Today we're chatting with a mate of mine, Olie Hunter-Smart. We kind of know each other from the London adventure scene. Ollie's most recent adventure involved him walking the length of India, which is over 4,000 kilometres by the way, retracing Gandhi's steps, exploring the theme of India's road to independence from Britain. But he's also travelled the length of the Amazon River, first trekking 400 miles through the Peruvian Andes before hopping in a kayak for the next 3,600 miles, finishing up at the Atlantic Ocean, becoming the first to complete the journey unsupported. He's also cycled Joggle, which is John O'Groats to Land's End. You might know it as La Jog, but it's just the other way around. And he also loves a good micro-adventure. So without further ado, Olie, welcome to the show.
Hello, George. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be on.
So how's things been? I don't think I've seen you since lockdown.
Yeah, it's all good. I mean, I work in advertising and I was freelancing when lockdown actually came into effect, and I lost my job pretty quickly. So I had a really nice 6-week holiday, enjoying the weather. Not that I could really go anywhere, but I came down to Dorset, where my parents live, and that meant I could get out paddleboarding very frequently, which was fantastic. And then I managed to land a job. You know, it's a great thing. Really enjoy working, and it's a very interesting project. But yeah, it's sort of put a bit of some brakes on the travels and adventure around the UK that a lot of people are doing at the moment.
Because you've done all of your trips self-funded, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, that's a really important thing for me. It's not about trying to do these massive expeditions that need a huge amount of funding. It's very much about, you know, going off and doing a trip and enjoying yourself. And, you know, the reason I'm doing it is because I want to do it, not because it's a world record breaking thing or, you know, an ego thing. It's very much about the journey and the enjoyment of it.
Yeah, I really like that. I think there's something about doing it for the purity of the experience as opposed to, well, I was going to say not just a big dick contest, but you know, this is an adult show, so that's fine. But yeah, it's nice when people do it really for the experience. And if what you want to do is break records, then that's great. If that's your thing, then that's cool. And I really admire that too, like seeing some of the distances that people are putting out on ultra long distance cycling or whatever it is. It does give you an appreciation for that kind of will and determination. But I think I'm mainly on kind of your wavelength of just doing the trip because you want to have a great adventure.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think you'll get a lot more out of it as well. You know, if that is your goal, is just to have a great time and meet some interesting people or go to a very different environment and challenge yourself in different ways, then you're going to get exactly what you want out of it. Whereas if you've got funding behind you or something else, there's always that little thing in the back of your mind that is, well, I've got to be delivering this piece of content to that sponsor, or, you know, I've got to be doing these things. And that ultimately changes your journey.
Some really good advice that I had from somebody in the adventure scene is they said, never take funding unless you really, really need it. it's very simple, but I think a very wise thing to say, because it comes with all of these constraints. It's extremely hard to get sponsorship because there's lots of people fighting for a few places. And like you say, it does change the trip dynamic. So yeah, I thought that was a really good piece of advice. Olie, I was thinking about, when was the first time that we met each other? Was it at Episdoe or was it at a camp out?
It was on Dave Cornthwaite's boat.
Yeah.
And we both signed up to a kind of a workshop thing with Dave to explore what we wanted to try and do in the adventure world and sort of change our work-life balance.
Yeah, it was how to get into the world of adventure or something like that. And yeah, there was only a couple of us on the boat and we hit it off. I think you started talking about your Amazon adventure, which sounded amazing. And I've never really had a chance to dig into it with you. So let's tee that one up next. But yeah, I think then we saw each other at a few different things, didn't we? In the London-based adventure scene, the Adventure Travel Film Festival, and
I think it was 2016. So it was before I went to India.
Yeah, I remember you saying I'm going to walk India, and I was thinking that sounds awesome. What a good project. And I loved that you had a really strong idea behind why you were doing it as well. But yeah, we'll get into that soon. So can you spill the beans and tee up the Amazon journey, then talk a bit about the genesis behind the trip?
I had been working in a job that I wasn't particularly enjoying, and I was looking for a way out. And I decided I was going to go traveling around the world and thoroughly enjoyed myself for a whole year. Came back and obviously broke, needed to get a job fast. And so managed to get into the freelance advertising world. And at the same time as I started that job, I was like, I don't want to lose that adventurous spirit. And so I was looking for something to do. And I went to a talk by Alistair Humphreys, and as you do, you go to the pub after with a couple of other people that were there, and we just started chatting. Initially, we were looking to row around Great Britain as a mixed crew to try and break a world record. We started training for it and planning for it and so on, but the team dynamic wasn't quite right, and things started to fall apart, and people were getting injured and so on. And so it sort of collapsed pretty quickly. And that was when I met Taron, the guy that I did the Amazon journey with. And he'd already started planning this trip, but was looking for a teammate that was 100% going to commit. And I, having been to the Amazon on my round the world trip, I was like, that is an environment I want to go back to. And in fact, jungles are my favorite environment to be in. And so I thought, you know what, this is the opportunity that I've been looking for. And we had a couple of face-to-face meetings, and within about a month, he said, I've found 2 kayaks. I need to put the money down. Are you in? And that was really where it started. I put that money down and was like, right, I'm fully invested in this. And we did about 4.5 months of planning up front. I was still working through till about April, and we set off in June. So I was doing it at weekends and in the evenings, and then eventually I stopped that to sort of focus on the planning full time. And we set off, June 2015.
In terms of planning, what did you actually have to do?
So it was a great question, because obviously you want to go on an adventure, and in order to have an adventure, you don't want to plan every single eventuality. But I do think a level of planning is important. Now, obviously, we had to source kayaks, which are notoriously hard to find in South America, certainly sea kayaks. So that was kind of one big thing. We wanted to have a guide with us for certainly part of the way. We were traveling through an area called the Red Zone, which is known for being incredibly dangerous. It's controlled by sort of narco traffickers. A lot of cocaine production happens in that region. So we wanted someone that could guide us through that region, speak the local language. And I think that's really important, because if you're putting yourself in danger like that, you need a local who can read body signals that you can't necessarily read if you're trying to converse in sort of broken Spanish, Spanglish, whatever. So we had to source a guide and make sure we got on with him. Then there was things like, the food and equipment that we were going to take. So we had to think about our evacuation procedures, how we would get out of being in the middle of nowhere if one of us got injured or something happened. Think about things like satellite phones and that sort of thing. And neither of us had really done anything like this before, certainly on this scale. So it's a case of sort of navigating your way through it and speaking to people, other people that have done similar expeditions, people that know the kinds of environments you're traveling through. And that really helps build up a picture of what you actually need to do. So I guess, yeah, and it takes time to do all of that sort of stuff.
And how was your training? What did you do beforehand? I'm sure that you were just very diligent, spreadsheets, measuring everything, getting VO2 max up, doing drills in the kayak, all that kind of stuff.
I mean, I think training is really important if you have the time, but it tends to be the first thing that goes. If you're too busy planning or packing or looking at equipment and that sort of stuff, and the training does sort of seem to drop off. But if you are physically fit and mentally fit before you go, you are going to have a much more enjoyable experience while you're away. And I always plan to do a whole load of, fitness routines beforehand, making sure I'm as fit as I can be. But inevitably, it just doesn't work like that.
No, it never happens, does it?
No. It's a shame because I know I would enjoy it more if I did focus on those bits, but one day I might learn.
And I think with the type of trips that really appeal to us, it's not about performance. So as long as you have the option to take it a bit slower, then you've got kind of a long time to train in the journey itself.
Yeah.
As long as you can have the option to kind of tap out after a fairly normal sized day and not get injured, I think that's a good way to go.
One of the things that you really can't train for in the UK is the altitude. And we started our journey in the Amazon at 4,500 meters up, right in the top of the Andes. And, there's no way I could get altitude training in.
Ben Nevis.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's just, you're not going to get put yourself through that similar sort of environment. Unless you go to the altitude centre in London, which is probably frightfully expensive and would take quite a long time to get to that level of fitness.
Not on the Dirtbag Adventurers can-do list, unfortunately.
No, unless they're going to sponsor me, in which case I'll happily turn up.
So you said that you met your teammate, Taran. So how did you actually meet him and how was the dynamic between you guys? Because you must have went into a kind of very stressful, intense situation, like mentally and physically, and you were basically stuck together for months. So how was that?
So I met him through a mutual friend, someone I'd sort of met through the London adventure scene. We'd been on a couple of wild camps before, and we were at an event. I got introduced to Taran then, and I'd actually heard about his journey beforehand and thought that's a really cool journey. I'd love to be part of it. And then the following week I got introduced to him. So it was sort of fate that actually happened. And we got on really well while planning. We put a lot of time and effort in, and we met up probably once or twice a week while we were going through that planning stage. And then once we were sort of underway, as with any expedition, you have your highs and your lows, and you're both feeling different things at different times. But yeah, broadly speaking, the relationship was pretty good. I think we sort of realized partway through we were on slightly different agendas. He was sort of wanting to get to the end quickly, and I was more about the culture and interested in meeting the people and so on. But actually, we made it work, and we got through to the Atlantic Ocean together, which is the main thing, and really enjoyed ourselves.
What do you think's important now if you were going to do something again and look for a partner, or there's other people listening who are potentially looking for somebody to join them on their epic, what do you think they should be looking for, or what would you look for again in somebody that you're going to travel with?
I mean, you've really got to be on the same agenda. So you've got to have the same overall objectives. And we had talked about wanting to make a film and so on, but I think I was possibly more interested in that. And if you're on a different agenda, then there can be sort of conflicts and so on. If I was to try and look for a new partner, I'd absolutely make sure that they were interested in filmmaking and as committed as I was, and I am to my projects. But, you also need to be able to rely on them, trust them to get you out of a situation. They've got to have their head screwed on, from a safety perspective. If the shit hits the fan, then you need to know that they are going to get you out of that situation. And you can rely on them.
So you had this guide who accompanied you for part of it. Did you encounter any sketchy situations, or did you manage to sail through fairly unencumbered?
We certainly had our fair share of sketchy situations. So our guide, Cesar, he'd done the journey before. We'd got hold of him through a guy called West Hansen, who had done a similar journey back in 2013. So Cesar seemed like the right guy. Sort of contracted him, met up with him when we we'd already walked that 400 miles down to where the river flattens out. That was where we were going to launch our sea kayaks. And we met Cesar there, and we got on really well with him. He helped sort out all of the permits for that red zone. And we had a really awesome sort of week with Cesar. And we'd got through the red zone, the worst of sort of the danger, but we'd actually entered an area which they called the pirate zone, much more unruly, sort of free, shall we say. And Cesar one morning just absolutely vanished, and we had no idea where he was. I was paddling next to him 1 minute, and 5 minutes later, there was no sign of him. And it was a really weird situation. And so Taryn and I sort of pulled over onto the riverbank, and we sat there and waited for him for a bit. We thought, well, he can't be too far away. So I then paddled back upstream. Taryn paddled downstream to see if he could find him, and there was no sign of him. And I then, went back down, met up with Taryn. We sort of sat on the riverbank and waited for a bit longer, and there was still no sign of Cesar. And it was 4 hours later before we decided we had to move further downstream, that he must have just continued, and we missed him. And so it was about 3 days later that we found out that he'd caught a boat downstream. He'd had enough of the journey, and he wasn't going to join us for the full month that he'd committed to. He was only going to do the week that he did. And so he sort of left us a little bit in the lurch there. So we did have some experiences in the pirate zone. We got shot at. But yeah, broadly speaking, that was kind of fine. We felt like we were in control. We just did it as we did before, with Cesar. We just kind of made sure we were off the river as the sun was starting to set. We made sure that we were away from the communities and so on and so forth. But yeah, it was pretty terrifying losing your guide for 3 days and not knowing where he was or whether he was safe. That was the main concern, is his safety.
Yeah, I can imagine that was pretty terrifying. You glossed over getting shot at before. Let's revisit that one. So what happened there?
It was a really weird situation. So both Taryn and I were on the inside of a river bend, and we sort of heard this cheering and shouting going on, and we hadn't really come across that sort of thing before. And so we moved further into the middle of the river, and then we saw this boat coming past, a load of guys sort of screaming and shouting. And then all of a sudden, they fired off 2 shots, which went straight over our heads. And it was much closer to Taryn than it was to me. And we suddenly sort of froze. We didn't really know what to do. So we thought the best thing to do is to get as far away from the gunfire and the boat as possible, paddled rapidly across to the other side of the river. And at this stage, the river's probably 200 meters wide. So it's really actually not very wide. And the boat just continued to pass. They continued to sort of cheer and shout and everything. And I think they'd just done it as a sort of, a threat, but in a very joking way. But it absolutely terrified us. And that was after Cesar had gone. So we didn't really know the situation.
Yeah, I'm sure. It's there is definitely another set of rules for life in terms of like culture and what people are used to. And there, because things are so much more dangerous, I've not spent time on the Amazon, but in kind of other similar environments. We were in rural Mexico, and a friend lost his drone, and we went looking for it into some pretty thick jungle. And probably an hour or something into it, it was unbelievably coincidental, actually. The drone gives a kind of signal of where it is within about something like a 25 meter squared radius. So we went looking for it, but it was so thick you couldn't even get through the brush at one point. So the guy whose drone it was just said, look, we're not going to find it. Let's just head back. And I was actually flying it when it went down, even though it just stopped responding. So he said, oh, it's not your fault. I think they said that there was some kind of interference with the signal and it just wouldn't come back. But I felt terrible for losing this guy's Mavic Pro. So I kept looking and just kept going for another 20 minutes or something. And it was dark. It was nighttime. And just as I was about to bail, thinking, oh, I'm just never going to find this. This is properly a needle in a haystack times 100. And as I turned around, not actually near where the dot said it was on the phone, there was a reflection that I caught on the floor, and it was the drone. And I just picked it up and I shouted to the bloke, I was like, I found it. And he was just like, no, you definitely haven't. Come on, stop fucking around. So I was like, no, I've genuinely got it in my hand. And after a long time clambering back up this mountain, we were walking back to our hostel, really, really happy with ourselves. And yeah, it'd been dark for a couple of hours at this point. And then this bloke comes towards us. And then we heard what we thought was a flare. And I told my girlfriend, if we're gone for more than an hour, then something's probably happened. So you should maybe start to worry a little bit. We'll try and get back by then.
Yeah.
And it had been maybe 2.5 hours or something. And then we heard this flare. I thought, oh shit, she's called mountain rescue or whatever. I mean, there isn't mountain rescue there, but something the equivalent of. And I was just thinking, oh no, we're going to have to pay for this. We've called these guys out. This is awful. And then this bloke appears and he's just got a shotgun and he's shooting at us. We were just in his garden and he wasn't very happy. And yeah, I think he thought that there's kind of a disputed tribal zone. So there's a lot of people like lighting fires to different patches and that kind of thing. So I think he thought we were some local guys trying to light up his back garden that was absolutely massive in the middle of the jungle. So that kind of thing just doesn't happen on the streets of London, does it really? Like it's,
no.
But you do find, I mean, those stories there's kind of always at least one of those, aren't there? Where shit nearly hits the fan, but then makes a great pub story.
Absolutely. But I also think it's people that are more dangerous than the environment or the animals that you're in, because they're so unpredictable. You know, both of us there have got stories where it's to do with people with guns, and neither of us had any idea how the situation would play out. Whereas at least in the environment or the animals and so on, you have an element of control of it, I think.
On the other side of the coin then, a kind of other common theme that people have on these big adventures is the kindness of strangers. Did you encounter that? Was that something that you experienced?
A number of times. In fact, it was the whole way along the river. You know, even when we were walking, we would walk into communities and ask where we could put up our tents, and they would say, just, stay inside. And they shuffled their kids around into different bedrooms to give us a room. And that continued all the way down the river. And it was particularly important the further we got towards the end, because you've got the tides that start having a big influence on the river. And the mangrove area just floods. Every 6 hours, the tide is up and there is no land at all. So you need to find somewhere to pull over and rest and, eat your food and that sort of thing. Otherwise, you are sitting in your kayak for the next 6 hours until the tide turns and you can actually paddle again. So yeah, we absolutely relied on that, the kindness of strangers down through the mangroves and out to the Atlantic Ocean.
Definitely something that makes the journey, I think, when you realise how good 99% of people are, restores that faith in humanity and gives you that kind of overwhelming feeling of well-being when you realise that people are just so nice, especially who don't owe you anything, but they just want to help you anyway. And yeah, I think that really changed me as a person. It changes your outlook after you've experienced that. I think you look at everything in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why platforms like Warm Showers and so on, Couchsurfer and that sort of thing work, is because you're meeting and staying with like-minded people that have experienced the kindness of strangers themselves, and therefore they're willing to let people into their house and stay for whatever. There's definitely something in it that sort of pulls on the heartstrings.
Yeah, I guess it's that sense of community and kind of tribalism that's deep rooted within us. They're like wanting to belong to a group and also it just feels good to help other people. So it's always an amazing experience and it never gets tiring.
Absolutely not. So
India, the biggie. I don't think we've really talked about how you came up with the idea, because I think the idea is great and a bit more interesting than just doing it because it's hard or because it's a long way. But you're not of Indian heritage, so what kind of spurred that trip?
After I came back from the Amazon, I went back into my freelance advertising job, and I was always looking for that sort of next thing. But I wanted to make sure that I came back with something else to kind of show for my time away. And so I really did want to make a film, and I'm still frustrated that I never actually made a film about the Amazon trip. But I felt like in order to make a film, it needed a bit more of a story and a bit more purpose. And I mentioned it before, traveling with purpose is such an important thing. And as I was traveling to work one day, I read this article. And in fact, this was actually before I did the Amazon trip. I read an article about protests, and it talked about all these different kinds of protests that had happened around the world. But there was one that really stuck out, and it was the Salt March. And it stuck out for two reasons. It was a peaceful protest, but also the fact that, Gandhi was protesting for like 20 years before India gained independence from Britain. And that is a hell of a long time to be campaigning for one cause. And it gave me that idea of wanting to do a bit more research. And the more research I did, I just thought there were no stories from the people that actually experienced it. Everything was from a very British perspective. History is typically written by the victors. And so I thought, do you know what? There are two sides to this story. And there's only one way I'm going to be able to find and hear those stories is by actually traveling to India and asking those questions myself. So I thought that's exactly what I'm going to do. And the Adventure Travel Film Festival that we went to in 2016 was my sort of first opportunity to speak to someone about how to make a film. And I spoke to Austin, the founder of the festival, in a workshop that I did. And he 100% got behind my idea. He thought it was amazing and offered to mentor me to make sure that I came back and made the film that I wanted to. And then had the opportunity to show it at his festival, which I did in 2018.
Can you just summarise the story of British occupation and independence, just kind of a Cliff Note version?
Yeah, so Britain had been ruling India since the sort of 17th century, mid-17th century. So we've been there a long time. And I think ultimately, the Indians wanted to take back control. They wanted to get rid of the British ruling powers and start ruling the country themselves. And Britain had it was just post-war, the First World War, they imposed this salt tax. And the tax was basically on the production of salt. And Gandhi, which is where he really started getting involved in the campaign, he just thought this is ridiculous. Everybody needs salt, all the animals, everything. And it's a naturally occurring mineral. So why should we be taxed on the production of it? But it was obviously a way for the British to earn money. And so he thought, no, I'm going to protest against this. And it wasn't really the fact that, he was protesting about the salt tax. It was more that he was protesting against the British occupation. And he did the Salt March, which was a 240-mile route from his hometown to the Arabian Sea, where he then harvested salt on the beach and therefore broke that salt law. And so that was kind of a defining moment. And Gandhi got a lot of media coverage. He got a lot of interest in his campaign. And I think it really united India behind that single idea about taking back control of their own country. It wasn't until 1948, so after the British left, that the salt tax was actually reprieved. They were still paying the taxes right up until that point. But yeah, that really kickstarted the independence movement, and it really rallied the nation behind that single idea of getting independence from Britain.
What about Gandhi? Can you just tell us a bit more about him as a person? And you've talked a little bit about a couple of the things that he did, but what was his background and why was he so powerful and able to move so many people?
He was actually a trained lawyer at Cambridge in the UK. So he was sent over to England for his education. He lived in London for a while, and one of his first jobs, he actually got posted to South Africa. And it was while he was traveling on a train through South Africa that he experienced some racial hatred towards non-white people. And he was a sort of an upper-class Indian. He paid for a first-class ticket on that train, and the conductor of the train said, no, it's only white people in this first-class carriage. And so he got thrown off the train. He couldn't believe that he was experiencing that sort of hatred, that an Indian person had been put in that same category as the blacks. And so he did a similar thing in South Africa, where he protested against the scenario that he'd been presented with. He actually then moved back to India and fundamentally didn't like the sort of the British occupation there, and so did the same.
It's something that you brought out in your film that was quite interesting, was that it wasn't necessarily the whole country united around getting rid of Britain. And I think people felt differently about it. And now looking back at it, it's probably even more different. There's a range of opinions as to how good the British occupation was. I mean, it always sounds like an occupation should be bad when you phrase it like that. But it was interesting when you were talking to people and they were kind of saying that it was beneficial in lots of ways for India.
Yeah, absolutely. Britain was incredibly organized. We'd had our industrial revolution. and could bring some of that technology out to our colonies. Now, that's not to say that we didn't exploit them either. We would have used Indian labor, to build railways throughout the world in all of our colonial nations. But we were able to help set up infrastructure, education systems, legal systems, and that is something that they are actually incredibly proud to have been given that opportunity. One that I didn't really think about actually was the fact that they had English as a language, and that is now such an important language, and it's put them on a global platform to be able to trade and so on with so many nations around the world. Whereas if they'd stuck with Indian or Hindu and the sort of state languages, I think they would sort of feel as if they had less opportunities presented to them.
Yeah, I guess even now with work and remote work, I work with a lot of people in India, especially doing like kind of tech stuff behind the scenes. And it's very accessible because they talk English. So I suppose that's one of the benefits. But like you say, certainly wasn't plain sailing, and a lot of people that hated it. And you mentioned a little bit about how ordered England was. And from the time that I spent in India, one of the words I would use to describe it, I mean, I absolutely love that country. I've spent a good few months traveling around and it was just wonderful. But one of the words that I would use to describe it is chaos, or maybe controlled chaos is a better way to think about it. And I remember even touching down, I think it was in Delhi. I was going there for knee surgery, actually. A friend of mine, when I used to do a lot of Thai boxing, I wanted to go out to Thailand, but then I couldn't have had a long distance flight and then flown within 2 or 3 months or something. So he said, my sister's a surgeon at one of the top hospitals in Delhi. You should head out there. And everybody thought it was a little bit unusual and that I was going to wake up with a great story, but it was fine actually, and it was really good and cost a lot less than doing it privately in the UK. But the experience that I had, I'd heard all these crazy things about how wild and a kind of assault on the senses you experience when you're in India. And I remember taking, I needed to get some transport from the airport to my hotel. And this guy ended up taking me in the tuk-tuk for a ridiculously long ride. Like, I don't think a tuk-tuk should go that far. I don't know how far it was, but I seemed to be in it for forever, over an hour. I thought he had a taxi and he was like doing it for half the price of everybody else. So I was like, oh, great deal. And then he had a tuk-tuk. And yeah, just potholes galore. And on that one journey, I think it was about 4:00 in the morning, I was just so interested to look around and see how different this country looked. And there was still quite a lot going on. And I remember going over this motorway and the guy just kind of like pulled over right over to the side and started going on the walkway. And in the middle were a load of street kids just playing cricket, and they were siphoning the traffic round the side of the motorway just because it was flat so they could play there. That happened within the first kind of half of the journey. And then we saw an elephant just going through another part of the motorway. And, I'd never seen that before. And I got dropped off at my hotel, and it was 5:30 or 6:00 or something by this point, and I was pretty hungry, so I just dropped my bags at the hotel and I said to the guy, is there anywhere that I can just buy a few snacks? And he said, yeah, there's a little shop just down the road. So I walked down there, and it was starting to get bright, and I was looking around and started to see like the tradespeople coming out and all the bright colored clothes, and just thinking like, wow, this is so different. I walked into the store and it was tiny. It was like a little box. It was like smaller than a London apartment. There was a bloke sitting down there who worked there behind the till with his feet on the table, just looking at his newspaper. And in the kind of 8 feet that the shop spanned, and probably 6 foot wide, there was a cow eating a poster, just like licking out the side of its mouth and just eating this poster. And this guy gave zero shits about it. And I was trying to go round the cow to kind of grab some crisps. And I was like, does he know that there's a cow in here? And he obviously did, but it's just such a different way of life. And like, that was such a great introduction to what India is. Like, you would never see that back home. How did you deal with it for such a long time, having such a different pace of life and so many people crammed into, I mean, it's not even a small area, there's just so many people there. How was it for you?
I mean, I think you're totally right. It is, I call it organized chaos. It's a way that India works, and only India knows how it works. And it does take a lot of getting used to. There are a lot of frustrations. You're trying to make things happen at your speed, the speed, we're used to here in the UK. And it just doesn't work like that. You just have to get into that rhythm. And once you do, you suddenly realize that actually it does work and you can kind of fit in with it. But if you try and change it in any way, it just, you're going to fight against it, and it's going to kind of come back and bite you, really.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to think about it, and exactly the same realization that I had. I mean, I didn't go to the north, though. I would love to go up to Kashmir and Leh. How was it there? I mean, there's a pretty hot spot. How was your experience around there?
I mean, it was really good. Like you, flew into Delhi. Within 48 hours, I'd actually flown up to Leh to kind of start my journey up in the north, which I felt was almost an easing into India. It's a really small mountainous city, and through the areas that I was walking through, it was really, walking through small villages and so on. Everyone was in that same rhythm. It wasn't chaotic, it wasn't hectic or anything like that. And I found that it was kind of an ease into what the rest of India was going to be like. Absolutely stunning scenery all around. And I'd hired some guides and a guide and some porters to sort of help me through the mountains, particularly along the trails that I was going to be taking, because there was no way I could know where I could restock with food. And also I had no experience in, ice climbing or
proper mountaineering.
Yeah, I had no experience in that. I'm not entirely sure they did either, but they sort of seemed confident enough. They were walking along these steep, icy slopes in their wellies.
Wow.
And I was just like, I don't know how you're staying upright on that, but I was sliding all over the place. It was mad.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, the scenery in your film, and having seen, we have a couple of trips out there, and it just looks stunning. The best of the Himalaya, and not many people there. So yeah, I was in awe when I saw you walking around there. It looked incredible. I guess it always changed, but what was a kind of typical day like? Maybe it was different in different regions, but what was your experience like? How did you think about a day? How did you structure things? What did you do?
With my guide and porters, it was kind of pretty set. They only wanted to walk about 7 hours at the most in a day. And quite often, we would start early. So we'd get up at 6, we'd be off by sort of 7:30. And then we'd be pretty much done by lunchtime. And I was sort of thinking, this is a bit weird. We could keep on walking for another 2-3 hours. We've got enough light and everything. But no, that was their kind of rhythm. They would get up, they would do their work carrying equipment and so on through the morning, and then they'd have a good afternoon rest. Again, I couldn't fight that. There was no way to convince them that we could go further and faster.
7 hours is a long way in wellies, Olie.
That's a very good point. That is a very good point. And then once I'd hit Manali, that was where I said goodbye to my guide and porters. I actually felt like I'd gained control of my expedition again. I could set my own rhythm and kind of do what I wanted to. The way I would normally operate is I'd get up at like 7, something like that. I always had this intention of getting up really early and avoiding the worst of the heat, but that never in reality happened. So I'd get up at sort of 7:30, sometimes 8 o'clock. I'd have my breakfast, and quite often I'd got chapatis made from the night before, which I'd, kept in my room, and I would have those with banana. And then I would set off on my day, and I'd pretty much walk through the whole day. I'd stop for a rest every couple of hours, make sure I was drinking enough water. I wouldn't really eat lunch. I felt that it was just too hot to really eat, but also there wasn't really any kind of lunchtime snacking food. I didn't then feel sluggish in the afternoon having eaten. So I wouldn't sit down for sort of, a big lunchtime meal. I would just graze on anything, fruit, biscuits, that sort of thing. And biscuits, when you're going on expeditions, they become a very much a staple. And then at about 5 o'clock, I would try and find somewhere to stay. And I would normally have aimed for a town or city or village or community that I knew that I could then walk into, and at least I would be safe. I could ask them if there was anywhere to stay. And then if I was staying with a family, which happened so frequently, way more than I was anticipating, I kind of lost my evening. But I would walk into these communities and say, is there somewhere I can put up my tent? And they would just say, come and have a drink. 2 hours later, I'm saying, it's now dark. Can I put my tent up somewhere? And they would say, don't worry about it. Just stay here tonight. And so I would then spend the evening with them. They would feed me as much as I wanted, really, which I didn't really realize to start with, but I obviously having not had lunch, I was eating a lot. And I suddenly realized in a couple of the places that the women don't eat until the men have eaten. And so I was being given all this food and they kept on saying, eat, eat, eat. But whatever I was eating meant less for the women that would then eat later. So I sort of had to control my food consumption when I was staying with people. But the evening was very much spent with them chatting away. I may get an interview done, if there was someone interesting to speak to. And that would go through till, 11 o'clock, midnight. And then they would quite often wake me up at 5 a.m. to start the conversation again, which made it very difficult because I wasn't really getting much sleep. I wasn't having the opportunity to do my admin, things like backing up my footage, washing my clothes, all of that sort of stuff. So I found I could do sort of 2 or 3 days with families before I would then need to find somewhere to stay.
Yeah, I mean, there's some of the best times that you have, but also, like you say, especially, I mean, you were dead set on making this film, so it takes a long time to do all of that kind of stuff. You've got to back it up, and the internet is never fast wherever you are, and ideally you want it on at least a couple of hard drives. So it takes a long time. When we were also filming our bike trip, and God, it took such a long time. So you have to be very, very committed, and your film turned out really, really well. So I'm so glad that you did. What kit were you carrying with you? You had a very old school. You were basically Indiana Jones. That was your kind of get up, weren't you? You were not Gore-Tex clad. No Gore-Tex grey around here.
It wasn't intended to be Indiana Jones, but yeah, it certainly looks a bit that way. So I had this 1960s canvas rucksack that I'd bought on eBay. And the reason I chose that is because I wanted something that kind of felt a bit more authentic and would blend in with the environment that I was traveling through. And I thought, if you buy a modern rucksack, you would end up, it's bright colored, it's high tech. It would sort of stand out in any film that I was making. Equally, I also think it could have become a target. So people see a tourist rucksack and they think that's got dollar signs all over it. Whereas my rucksack, it was so beaten up, it was so stitched together that there was no way there was going to be anything valuable in that. And so they didn't really bother it or me, which was quite nice.
I think it looks really cool. You look like a real expeditioner. So what else did you were carrying everything, right? So you had your, how much was your bag roughly? You had your tent, all your sleeping stuff, filming equipment, which weighs loads.
Yeah. So I had about 26, 27 kilos for a lot of it. At points, it obviously went up when I was carrying a bit more food or water, which is an insane amount of weight to be carrying.
Huge.
The most frustrating thing is I didn't use most of it. I had this fear that I would never find somewhere to stay. And so I had my tent with me, a relatively compact tent, but it was a 2-man tent nonetheless, so that I could make sure I could fit my equipment and bag inside the tent at night if I needed to. I used my tent 4 times between the bottom of the Himalayas and the bottom of India because of that kindness of strangers. So many people took me in, or I found a hotel to stay in. The couple of nights I used my tent, I was actually staying in a temple or a school building or something like that where there were mosquitoes and stuff. So I just used the mesh netting. So yeah, I didn't really need to take that. And equally, I had a really thin sleeping bag. I had a thermal top because I decided I didn't need, a full-on thick jumper traveling through sort of 30 degrees, where it was sort of 30 degrees at night time. So obviously I wasn't going to need that. But there was an area where I was going up to a higher altitude again. So I thought, I don't know what it's actually going to be like, how cold it's going to get. But yeah, inevitably I didn't need that. I think 50% of the weight was probably camera equipment. You've got spare batteries, you've got cables and chargers, and obviously everything has a slightly different adapter and so on. I carried a battery pack with me that would allow me to charge up my laptop if I wanted to, equally all my camera batteries. So I could keep my cameras rolling for probably a week without needing an electrical supply, just by using that battery pack. But batteries are, inevitably are incredibly heavy.
Wow, that's a long time for being able to keep your cameras rolling. I mean, kind of what you need, especially when you're going remote. But I've never had anything like that kind of capacity. Let's go a little bit film nerdy for a minute then. So what equipment were you filming with?
So I started off with a Canon XF 105, which is a production quality camera. That actually broke partway through. I got it repaired in Delhi and it broke again pretty quickly after. So for about a month of walking, I was actually relying on my compact camera, which shot HD quality footage, but the you couldn't plug an external microphone in or anything like that. And I was relying on my smartphone for a lot of that footage as well, certainly for that month, until I could get the camera repaired again. And in fact, they ended up writing it off. And so I had to then buy a new camera, again, similar production quality level camera. I then had a shotgun mic that sat on top of the camera, and I had a lapel mic for any interviews that I did, which is, it really makes sure that you capture all of that quality audio. That's really what you're after. You can get away with bad footage and you can cover up gaps with sort of cutaways, as they call them. But if your audio is poor, then actually you can't really use that footage or that content. And then I took a MacBook, an 11-inch MacBook Air, that would allow me to do all the backups and stuff like that. And then I just had 2 hard drives. And then actually I ended up buying more hard drives as I was going, because I filled those up pretty quickly. And so I ended up, I think, with 4 hard drives that I was carrying the whole time.
What shotgun mic were you using? Do you remember?
It was a Rode, I want to say N1, sort of a fairly standard entry-level microphone, but it fits perfectly on top of your camera. You put, a dead cat over the front of it and it blocks out all of the wind. But yeah, it produces really good audio quality.
And how about the lapels?
To a certain extent, I wish I'd used the lapels a bit more. I think I got a little bit lazy for some of my interviews. There was one that I'd actually turned off the lapel mic, which I was using a little Zoom recorder as well. It's a small handheld recording device that you plug the lapel mic into. And I turned that off to get one of my cutaway shots. And then she started talking about her latest. I was doing an interview with a historian, and she was talking about her latest research, which was about the people that are still migrating from Pakistan into India because of the racial hatred they're still subjected to today. And she reeled off this story, and I was like, oh, this is an amazing piece of content. And I sort of had forgotten I'd turned off the microphone. I then, obviously got back into my hotel room and re-looked at the footage and was like, I didn't capture that audio that well. I thought I could get away with it because I had the shotgun mic still on, but there was a ceiling fan above her and that was on. And so the whole interview, there was just this like whirring in the background. There was a lot of hooting and so on. And you just really couldn't make out what she was actually saying. So frustrating.
Yeah, it's so annoying. It happens to everybody at least once or twice. I mean, with the podcast, it's not happened to me. I've had a couple of stinkers, like with Austin Vince, actually. And we tried to record video, and then afterwards it was just completely scrambled. So that really sucked when you've taken up an hour of somebody's time and then you've got nothing to show for it.
Yeah.
But I think probably the worst one I had was we were in Alaska, and marijuana is legal there. So we thought, when in Rome, headed to the pot store, bought some weed brownies and ate them, lots of them. And we're walking around, and I had my microphone. I just kind of carried it around because you always meet these weird and wonderful people.
Yeah.
And we walked past this really long, strange looking drive, and it just looked very intriguing. And it said something, I can't remember what it was. It wasn't no entry, or it was something like strangers not allowed, only the blessed, or something like that. And we were thinking, wow, that sounds weird. Let's go and see what it is. So we started walking down this trail, and on and on and on and on. And this is in rural Alaska as well. So it kind of looked like they were trying to hide something.
Yeah.
And Alaska is very much the thing that we used to say about it was either people in Alaska are either running from something or people are running from them. And that was kind of how it felt. And we kept walking, and we got to this beautiful building at the end, and it turned out that it was a Mormon camp. So we thought, oh, well, it was about 33 degrees or something. We had no water left. It was absolutely baking, and we were absolutely baked. And so we said, oh, let's just go in there and ask them for some water. So we went in, asked if we could have some water, started chatting to them, and they were absolutely lovely, really, really nice, interesting, started having a chat with them, and they just lived in such a different way. And I said, oh, would you mind if we did a podcast? She said, no, not at all. And we were talking about all this fascinating stuff like polygamy in the church and like modernity for religion. And then she told this unbelievable story about her daughter dying in a car crash and her losing her faith for the first time ever. And it was just this incredibly powerful story, and also would have made the best, like, kind of golden audio. And I was really baked at this point, and I looked down and we were about an hour and 10 minutes in, and she just stopped crying. And I just thought, wow, that is so powerful. And I looked down and I'd forgot to press record.
Oh my God.
And that was brutal. That was really, really bad, because I obviously couldn't say, could you just repeat that last bit again? I missed that. So it happens to everyone. But I think having a kind of checklist for things definitely helps, and normally helps you avoid that kind of stuff. But more kind of big picture, what do you think will bring it home soon? But I just want to ask you this about filmmaking. There are lots of adventure travel films that are made that I think really miss the mark. And I think because adventure travel is kind of interesting and sexy, or extreme sports, people mistake action for story. And you get so many documentaries and films where there is no story, and people just use cool things like backflips or beautiful sunsets or that kind of thing. And they try and make a film out of that, and it almost never works. But with the Road to Independence, your film, there is a really strong story behind it, and it's very compelling, and you don't have to be into adventure travel to appreciate it. I actually watched it with my mum and dad, and they really enjoyed it because the story is so strong. So what do you think makes a great adventure travel film, and what kind of advice do you have on trying to help budding filmmakers bring out the story?
It has to be about the story, and you can't just be the story. You know, you traveling through an environment or whatever, that's not interesting enough nowadays. 10 years ago, that would have been fine. 15 years ago, you know, you would have been a pioneer of adventure filmmaking back then. And that's why, you know, films like Ed Stafford walking the Amazon, Bruce Parry, some of his stuff, you know, that's why they were so compelling and successful back in 10, 15 years ago. Nowadays, it needs to be so much more than that. And that doesn't mean to say it's got to be record breaking. You just need to have a interesting story from a different angle. And I think that's probably a good piece of advice, is try and find that story, look for a different angle. And that once you start investigating and going down that path, the chances are it will twist and turn and change ever so slightly. You know, you'll never make the film that you actually set out to make. Once you get back into the edit suite, you'll find new bits of story that you want to try and explore, and so on. Trying to find that angle that is different and interesting and that nobody else has done is very important. At the same time, I think shots are important. There are a lot of people that think they can go away and cycle around the world, or, you know, do their trip, and they can come back, look at their footage and realize they've missed so much because they've not got shots of them on their bike as they've crossed through these incredible landscapes. They might have one or two, but they've not taken the time and effort up front to actually follow through with it. You know, and I would set my camera up on the tripod, and I would walk past it, I would walk back, and I would do that maybe 5-6 times a day, every single day, because I knew that I needed those transition shots, as you call them, in order to help my journey flow, my story flow as I'm making that film. And then, of course, you need, if you're doing an interview or you're doing an action, if it's buying fruit in a market, for example, you need to get cutaway shots. So you need to take the time to set the scene. They call them establishing shots. You need to think about the actual filming of you transacting, doing that transaction, buying the fruit, handing over the money, but also make sure you get cutaways as well. You know, take a close-up of the fruit, take a close-up of the guy's face that you're buying the fruit off. Make sure you've got a video of coins in your hand, for example. Take a wide shot of the rest of the scene. And when you get into the edit suite and you're sort of piecing that all together, you'll have all of the shots that you need, and the story for that sequence will pretty much write itself. You know, it becomes much, much easier.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And planning kind of the story, or at least the shots in your head, or ideally writing them out before, really, really helps. I think some people like to just shoot everything and get into the edit suite and then try and find the story and shots from there. But I couldn't do that. I think that's a really, really tough way to go about it. So like you say, thinking about it before and making sure that you've got everything is going to make your life so much easier if you are planning to make a film.
Yeah. And, I think taking the time out to do that before your trip, we talked about training earlier. One of the bits of training I did was not physical training before India. It was camera training, training in how to make a sequence and then get into the edit suite, piece it together myself. So I knew what I then needed to be doing on my journey. And that was part of my training for the Indian trip.
Olie, have you got any other adventures planned? I guess now has been a crazy time with Corona, and you've now found some work, which is great, and you probably want to hang on to that for a little while. And we can't go traveling properly to far-flung places quite yet, although things are starting to open up. Have you got any ideas? Do you keep a little book? Are you just enjoying normal life for a while?
Yeah, it's funny. You kind of slip back into normal life quite easily, and time slips away, and you sort of think, "Wow, was that really?" So my India trip was 2017, 3 years ago, which is a long time ago, but it doesn't feel that long ago. But in terms of other ideas, I really enjoyed making the film, and that's something I want to continue doing. I've got one idea for Southern Africa along a similar theme. I really enjoyed investigating the historical side of India's independence and so on. And I think that's a really nice theme that I can try and continue. I haven't taken the time to do much research into it yet, so I'd need to do a lot more up front before I actually think, there's enough of a story in that to make it into a film and make it worthwhile. But in the meantime, little trips here and there. So in January, actually, I walked across Hadrian's Wall, which was really fun. 4-day trip. I took a load of footage. I still haven't made my film because I didn't do it quick enough after I came back. So little trips here and there.
Sounds good. Yeah, little micro adventures are amazing too. Even if it's just an overnighter, or I'm enjoying kind of lots of little ones, a few multi-dayers here and there. They definitely give you the fix of a big trip, but allow you to kind of live normal life as well. And you just hinted on another good bit of advice for filmmaking. Try and do it as soon as you come back. Otherwise, it's so hard to edit them again. My cycle touring or bike packing films, I can't believe I still haven't published them yet, but they will be done one day. But it gets harder as every single day goes by to get them done. So I think good idea to set yourself a target when you get home, give yourself some time and smash it out.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Olie, thanks so much for coming on the show. It's been awesome to chat. I always love having a chat with you and speaking about adventure and hearing about your trips, and always find it really inspiring. And want to get out on my next trip and do some filming too. So thank you for coming on.
Thanks very much for having me. It's been good fun chatting to you, and nice to hear some of your stories as well.
So Olie, where can people find out a bit more about you and your trips and your adventures and watch your film?
So my website is probably the best place, oliehuntersmart.com, OLIE, or I'm on, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram with the same handle, Olie Hunter Smart. And my film is on Vimeo. Just search for The Road to Independence.
Great stuff. Well, thanks again, Olie. Thanks everybody for listening and tuning in, and look forward to seeing you next time. Have a good one. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So that's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Head over to Call to Adventure, that's TO, calltoadventure.uk for show notes and more about this episode. You'll also find lots of other free content there. Things like how-to guides and gear reviews, everything to get you out on your next adventure. We've also got loads of adventures for you to join us on in the UK and abroad. We've got things like climbing, hiking, mountaineering, surfing, wild swimming, ski touring, and we're adding new ones all the time, so do take a peek. Each booking helps us fund our green mission, and all international trips are carbon offset. Please do rate and review the show if you're enjoying it. It helps get more people engaged with the outdoors and on board with protecting wild places. Thanks for listening. See you next time.